Community, please join us in warmly welcoming Dr. Amel Karboul, Chief Executive Officer of the Education Outcomes Fund.
Assalamu alaikum. Can someone help me with the mic? Maybe a bit lower. Thank you very much. Wow. Dear graduates, families, faculty and friends, it's really an honor for me to be here today. It's 2 a.m. on the 18th of April 2009 in Cologne, Germany. I have just given birth to my second daughter, Layla. I'm exhausted. I have a postnatal infection, and I cannot sleep. So I do what any reasonable mother does at 2 a.m. I start reading a German business magazine. The magazine is called Brand 1, one of the most respected business magazines in the German-speaking world. Known for taking big questions around work, society, leadership, and going deep, kind of a slow media. That night, I read an article about migration and belonging. I do not remember every detail now, but I remember how I felt. I felt touched. I felt moved. The article made me reflect on my own life in Germany. I was a young entrepreneur, a mother, a foreigner, a Muslim, an Arab, an African, and somehow successful in rooms where I was not expected to belong. The world I was moving in was mostly male, older, white, Christian in its cultural codes, German, and shaped around lives very different from mine. So at 2 a.m., with a newborn baby and no sleep, I open my laptop and write a letter to the editor. I write about discrimination, but not as an abstract idea. I wrote about the small, repeated moments that drain you, being asked again and again when I had come to Germany, and more painfully, when I was planning to leave. What I did with my children while I worked and traveled, God knows. The assumptions people made because I was an Arab, African, Muslim woman moving freely in corporate rooms. I wrote about the exhaustion of succeeding in a world that still keeps asking you to explain why you are there. Because discrimination is not always one dramatic event. Sometimes it's hundreds of small questions, assumptions, exclusions, and explanations that slowly drain you. But I also wrote about something more complicated, that even in a country where I often felt foreign, there were things I deeply valued: the seriousness, the depth, the willingness to think slowly and structurally. A magazine like Brand 1 could probably only exist in a place like Germany that made room for that kind of deep reflection. So the letter was not only pain, it was also attachment. It was a way of saying, this place is really difficult for me, and still there is so much here that I do not want to give up on. I wrote it because something in me was awake. I wrote it from the heart, but I also wrote it carefully. I spent hours on it. I tried to something true and to say it well. Then I sent it, thinking probably no one will ever read this letter. The next morning, Sunday, the editor-in-chief, Gabriele Fischer, wrote back. She had just sent the next issue to print around midnight. She was awake, reading through the emails that had come in. And then she wrote, "I'm sitting here with goosebumps. Your letter moved me more than much of what I have read in recent weeks and months. She also wrote one sentence that stayed with me. If Brand 1 can help you feel a little less like a stranger in this country, with all its flaws but also its gifts, then today is a day of celebration for me. She said she would have loved to print the letter in full, but the next issue was already finished, and that she would keep my thoughts in mind in case they fit in a future issue. And life continued, and I thought I might never hear back. Months later, Gabriele wrote again. At that time, I was leading my consulting firm, working with CEOs and executives boards on strategy, transformation, and leadership. Gabriele wrote that they were preparing a new issue on denken, thinking, and she remembered my letter. I thought my profile and work would fit. So they interviewed me. A photographer came to take pictures of me and my family, and shortly after, the article was published. And that profile traveled further than I could have imagined. First, it found its way to Berlin, to the offices of the BMW Foundation. One of the women leading their Young Leaders program later told me, I read the profile and thought, you're exactly the kind of person we should invite. The BMW Foundation did at that time something simple but powerful. It took people like me, people who were comfortable in corporate rooms, and brought us into contact with people, places, and organizations that we might otherwise never encounter. In a way, it was around three movements: open the mind, expose people to ideas, systems, and realities that you don't see clearly; open the heart, take them out of conference rooms and classrooms to places where people work directly with social problems. For me, this moment was in New York in 2010, spending time with lawyers working with undocumented people. I remember listening to stories that were so far away from the boardrooms I usually worked in. And finally, open the will. So not only to ask, what do you think, but what is yours to do? So over the next years, I tried to follow that question. I was still doing my corporate work, but I began to give more of my time to civil society, as a thinking partner, as a board member, sometimes simply as someone willing to listen, learn, and help. At first, it's kind of set alongside the rest of my life, but slowly, it began to pull me in. And something in me shifted. At that time, I was working on multi-billion-dollar mergers, strategy implementation, executive teams, work that can feel when you're inside it like the height of complexity. I do not want to dismiss that work. It mattered. I learned a lot. Often I was the only woman in the room. I had to become excellent. I had to learn how to read power, how to hold a room, how to challenge people without breaking the trust. And also become known half-jokingly as the executive coach who made CEOs cry. Not because I was cruel, I hope not, but because I was able sometimes to get beneath the mask many senior leaders have to wear. The mask of certainty, the mask of control, the mask of always knowing the answer. And sometimes, when people reconnect with themselves after years of performance, something softens, something real appears. So I thought I understood transformation. But then civil society humbled me. I came closer to people in organizations working with families experiencing homelessness, refugees trying to rebuild lives, women escaping violence, communities living with addiction, poverty, exclusion, and the daily erosion of dignity. And I realized there is another kind of complexity altogether, deeper, messier, and much harder to solve. What is the timeline of rebuilding trust? How do you measure the moment someone feels safe again? How do you put dignity into a spreadsheet? Over the next few years, something in me became harder to ignore. I was successful, but I no longer wanted success to be the whole story. I wanted my skills to serve something larger. My plan was still actually quite organized. I thought I'll grow my company, become chairwoman, hire a CEO, and then spend more time on philanthropy and social impact. But then life happened while I was making those plans. The German magazine Profile did not only travel to Berlin, it also traveled back home. A family friend saw the magazine at my parents' home in Tunisia and asked my dad about it. That conversation led to a Tunisian magazine called Leaders, publishing a profile of me as part of a series on Tunisians abroad. And then yet again, a few years later, another moment arrived, this time in South Africa. In December 2013, Nelson Mandela had just died. I remember writing in a condolence book in Cape Town, "The best way to honor your legacy is to serve." Be careful what you tell the universe, it might actually hear you. A few days later, still in Cape Town, the Prime Minister of Tunisia, a man I had never met and did not know, called me. What I did not know at that time was that the editor-in-chief of Leaders, the man who interviewed me for my profile, became one of the people actively advising the incoming Prime Minister while he was building his team. Tunisia was in a fragile moment. The Arab Spring had begun there 3 years earlier. By 2013, Tunisia had been shaken by 2 political assassinations. A technocratic government was being formed to guide the country towards election. The Prime Minister Mahdi Jomah said, in essence, "You have experience in change and transformation, you have worked globally. I'm building a team, almost like a startup team. Would you come and help build the first democracy in the Arab world?" He offered me the Ministry of Tourism, one of the biggest employers in the country and major part of the economy, and I would become the first woman in Tunisia to lead an economic sector. Then he gave me about 2 hours to decide. 2 hours whether to decide to keep the life I had built or step into a country that was trying to reinvent itself. I remember thinking, if I'm going to leave my company, my children, and the life I was living in the UK by then, I need to know whether this person and I share enough values. So I asked difficult questions. I was really too direct probably in that first conversation. I needed to know whether he could take challenge and disagreement, whether he wanted real transformation or just decoration, whether I could be empowered or I would be used. I do not remember his exact words, but I remember the feeling. I hung up and thought, I can work with this man. Serving in the Tunisian government remains one of the most meaningful phases of my life. It was humbling, intense, difficult. I remember a Finnish journalist asking me, "Have you ever thought of resigning?" And I was like, once a day? It taught me more about service, power, fear, courage, and responsibility than any other chapter in my life. And the fragile democratic transition would later be recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because I could have never planned what would happen after I sent that email at 2 a.m. Obviously, there was serendipity in it, of course, but it was definitely not random luck. The letter was written with heart, but also with craft. The work I had done for years was serious work. The civil society engagements changed me because I allowed them to change me. And the decision to say yes to Tunisia was not romantic. It was frightening. It had consequences. You cannot fully plan your life. You can keep trying to becoming the kind of person who's ready when life asks something of you. You cannot know which email, which conversation, or which act of service will become important. But you can do the thing in front of you with attention and integrity. You cannot control when the big call comes, but you can do the inner work before it does. You know, we often hear people telling us, know who you are. It sounds good. It fits nicely on a poster or a bumper sticker. But honestly, I'm still figuring out who I am. Maybe we all are. My daughter just finished university, and she's putting this massive pressure on herself on what she's going to do with her life. And I'm like, I'm 53, and I still don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Maybe just figure out what you're going to do as a next step. Otherwise, it can be pretty overwhelming. So I'm not telling you to live here with a fixed identity, a perfect life plan, or a beautifully packaged answer to the question of who you are and what you want. I'm stay in conversation with yourself. Do the inner work. Ask yourself difficult questions before the world asks them for you. Hard questions, like, what do I value when nobody is applauding? Where am I pretending? What wounds might I mistake for ambition? What part of me wants to serve? And what part of me wants to be seen serving? These are not comfortable questions. But leadership without inner work can become dangerous. Because if you do not examine yourself, your ego will lead for you. Your fear will lead for you. Your need to be admired will lead for you. Your unhealed wounds will start wars and call them vision. For me, inner work is not separate from leadership. It is what helps me ask, what is the next honest step? What is the letter I need to write? What is the conversation I need to take seriously? What is the skill I still need to build properly? What is the injustice that disturbs me enough that I cannot simply scroll past it? You are graduating from a school that has asked you to think seriously about leadership on this continent. That is a beautiful invitation, but also a heavy one. I remember being on the Africa CEO Forum with 8 heads of states from Africa on the podium, all of them talking about young people and women on the continent. I looked around and told them, your age average is 79. What are you actually doing to give young people in Africa more space to lead? But if you are told too early that you are a leader, you can start performing leadership before you have asked where your leadership is for. Before you have asked, what should my gifts be in service of? Leadership is not only about ambition. It's not only about getting into the right university, building the impressive career, winning the title and the awards, being the first, being the youngest, being the one everyone celebrates. Those things may come, and if they do, receive them. But they are not the center. The center is service. The center is dignity. And the center is whether when power comes close to you, you have done enough inner work not to be seduced by it. The world you are entering will change fast. The dream you have now may become obsolete. And hopefully you will change too. Not because you were wrong before, because you're alive, because you're learning, because you're allowing the world to deepen you. And the inner work is not something you do in silence. It's also how you pay attention to what keeps calling you, to what disturbs you, to the moment when your heart, your mind, and your skills seem to lean in the same direction. And do not wait until everything is clear before you begin. Send the email, join the workshop, visit the organization, take the small assignment seriously. Serve before you are ready to be seen as a leader. And when something moves you, when something angers you, we need more angry young people, by the way, touches you, wakes you up at 2 a.m., pay attention. Now, not every 2 a.m. message should be sent. Maybe to an editor, okay. If you want to send a text message to your ex, maybe sleep on it. But sometimes in the middle of exhaustion, something true breaks through. Graduates, you do not need the whole map today. You need courage for the next step, humility to keep learning, excellence in the work in front of you, and enough inner honesty to recognize the moments that are yours to answer. So be ambitious, yes, but do not only be ambitious for success. Be ambitious for depth. Be ambitious for service. And what we need most today is be ambitious for truth, for the kind of life that keeps making you more human, not less. And when your own 2 a.m. moment arrives, whatever form it takes, may you be awake enough to respond to it, to recognize it, and brave enough to answer. Thank you.